Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Now we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 8th of December 2018, and the news that would be covered today is given on the screen, and the timestamp for the same is given in the description and the comment section given below. And so now with this, let us start with the first article. Now we have taken the lead editorial from the editorial page on page 6. Now what this article talks about is the electoral bond scheme. And what this article provides is a critique of the electoral bond scheme. So what we're going to do is understand first about the electoral bond scheme. And after that, we're going to understand the critique of the electoral bond scheme. Now before moving forward, let us first understand as to where this article and the upcoming explanation would be placed in your UPSC syllabus. So first, with regards to your prelims syllabus, it would be placed in Indian polity and governance. And with regards to your mains examination, it would first be placed in GS paper 2 within the section governance. And within the subsection, important aspects of governance, transparency and accountability. Apart from that, the electoral bond scheme would also be placed in government policies and interventions for development in various sectors. And the critique of electoral bonds would also be placed in issues arising out of their design and implementation. And lastly, it would also be placed in GS paper 4 within the section information sharing and transparency in government, and also with regards to challenges of corruption. So now let us first understand about the electoral bonds. Now the first aspect that we're going to understand is what are electoral bonds. Now the concept of electoral bonds was introduced in the budget of 2017-18 for political funding. And when we mean a bond in an electoral bond, it means that it is a banking instrument which will be used for funding eligible political parties. Now these electoral bonds can be purchased by any person who is a citizen of India or any company organization which has been incorporated or established in India. So therefore you must understand that electoral bonds can be purchased by both individuals and also by companies and organizations. And a person can buy an electoral bond either by himself or jointly with any other person. However, the purchaser of electoral bonds, either being an individual or a company or organization, can only buy electoral bonds on fulfillment of all KYC or Know Your Customer norms, which has been provided by the bank. And apart from this, the individual or the company or organization has to make the payment for electoral bonds from a specified bank account. And this bank account also has to fulfill every type of KYC norms of the banks. Now, one of the most important aspects of electoral bonds is that it will not carry the name of the person who is giving the amount. Now it means that if you and me have made an electoral bonds, then this bond would not carry our name, and therefore a person can buy an electoral bond anonymously or in incognito mode. And therefore this feature of electoral bonds has been the main reason for its critique. However, we'll try to understand further about this later in this section. Now, political parties which are registered under the Representation of People's Act of 1951 are the only one that can receive electoral bonds. Meaning that if you and me make an electoral bond, then we can only provide it to a political party which is registered under the Representation of the People's Act. And apart from this particular political party has to have more than 1% of the votes in the recently held general or state election. So now let's say there is a registered political party which had only received 0.5% vote during the general election of 2014. Therefore, this political party is not eligible to take electoral bonds. And in similar terms, if you consider that there was a political party which was also registered under the Representations of People Act and had participated in the recently held Karnataka elections and had received more than 1% of the vote, then this political party becomes eligible to receive electoral bonds. Now, electoral bonds can only be cashed by the registered political party. Now, the designated bank for electoral bond scheme is the State Bank of India. And the State Bank of India has designated various branches from where you can buy and cash electoral bonds. And now the last aspect that you need to understand about the electoral bond are its features, wherein electoral bonds would be issued or purchased for any value in the multiples of rupees 1000, 10,000, 1 lakh, 10 lakh and 1 crore. And these can only be purchased from specified branches of the State Bank of India. However, these electoral bonds shall be valid only for 15 days after they have been issued. Now, as you might remember, there was a recent news on electoral bonds, Now, what the State Bank of India does is that it provides electoral bonds in tranches. Now, it means that State Bank of India provides electoral bonds after specified amount of time for a particular amount of days. So, what the State Bank of India does is that it may provide electoral bonds in the month of January, then maybe in the month of July, and then maybe in the month of December. And even within these months, State Bank of India provides electoral bonds for a particular amount of days. So the most recent selling of electoral bonds by the State Bank of India was for 10 days. And the most recent selling of electoral bonds was undertaken by the State Bank of India in the month of October. However, it is not required for you to remember the facts with regards to trenches and must be understood from a common point of understanding. However, one fact that came out of this news was that most of the electoral bonds were sold in the rupees 1 crore category, wherein roughly around 50% of the electoral bonds were sold in this category. And after that, almost 40% of the electoral bonds which were sold in the month of October were sold in the rupees 10 lakh category. And therefore, this is a fact that you need to remember, especially with regards to your upcoming prelims examination, wherein the two topmost values in which electoral bonds are sold are first the rupees 1 crore category and after that the rupees 10 lakh category. So now hopefully up till here you've understood the basic facts about the electoral bonds. And as you understand that the electoral bonds were first announced in the economic survey of 2016 and 17, they have not yet been asked in the prelims examination and therefore become very important for your upcoming prelims examination of 2019. So based on the understanding that has been given on electoral bonds, a question for your practice is consider the following statements on electoral bonds. And what you need to do is pause this video, solve this question, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now the correct answer to this question is D, 1, 2 and 3. Now the first aspect that you need to understand that this question asks which of the statements given above are incorrect. So with regards to the first statement that electoral bonds can be purchased only by citizens in the individual capacity is a wrong statement. Wherein electoral bonds can be purchased by companies or organizations that are established in India. And apart from this, electoral bonds can also be purchased in joint capacity. Now the second statement is also wrong, wherein it is the upper denomination of rupees 10 lakh and rupees 1 crore, which account for almost 80% of the purchases. And the statement 3 is also incorrect, wherein electoral bonds can be used to finance the political party in power. And so therefore statement 1, 2 and 3 are incorrect, and the correct answer to this would then be D, 1, 2 and 3. So now hopefully you've understood about electoral bonds. Now let us understand the critique of electoral bonds which has been given by the author in this article. Now the author has given three main critiques of electoral bonds and we'll try to understand all of these three critiques within depth. Now the first critique given by the author is that electoral bond raises security threats. Now one of the problems with electoral bonds is that the election commission cannot monitor their funding, wherein the identity of the person who has purchased the electoral bond is bound by secret, and therefore it becomes difficult for the election commission or for any other government organization to know whether the money through which the electoral bonds have been purchased is whether black money or not. And one of the main issues with regards to electoral bonds in terms of security threats is that it can be misused for routing foreign money and thereby increases the ability of other countries such as China, Pakistan and others to influence Indian elections. Wherein what countries such as China can do is provide money to various individuals who are citizens of India who then on behalf of China would purchase electoral bonds and thereby sponsor any political party which has a pro-China stand. And since Indian intelligence agencies such as the IB, the RAW cannot monitor as to who has purchased the electoral bonds or through which money that person has purchased electoral bonds, it increases the ability of foreign countries to influence Indian elections. Now the second main critique given by the author is that electoral bonds allow corporates to sponsor political parties without having any form of oversight. Now since companies or organizations which are registered in India are allowed to purchase electoral bonds and also do not have to provide their identity, it allows for corporate sponsorship to be of without any form of oversight by the election commission or any other organization, wherein even the shareholders of that company would be unaware as to how that particular company is contributing for political funding. Now, since the identity of the company or the organization who purchases electoral bonds is not provided, A company then can indulge in political funding without even telling its shareholders. The second critique of corporate sponsorship through electoral bonds is that the electoral bond scheme removes an existing condition that had prohibited companies from donating anything more than 7.5% of their average net profit. So it basically allows loss making entities to make unlimited contributions for political funding. So, what this allows is that any company which is undergoing bankruptcy proceedings under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, that company can still make political funding, and therefore the author has raised concerns that then this can be used for political bribery. Now, another aspect of the electoral bond scheme is that initially there was a requirement that corporations ought to have been in existence for at least 3 years before that organization or corporation could make political donations. Now, this provision was made to stop shell companies from being created and laundering their money into politics. However, what has happened with electoral bonds is that any company or organization which has been incorporated in India can buy electoral bonds, and therefore shell companies then can be formed just prior to elections to funnel black money into politics. And since the Election Commission also does not know the name of the shell company which is funding a political party, then this flow of black money into politics then becomes difficult to stop. And the fourth and the last concern with regards to corporate purchasing of electoral bonds is that corporates can misuse electoral bonds to bribe the government of the day. And since various organizations of the Government of India, such as the CBI, the Competition Commission of India, and various other organizations, cannot know the identity of the organization which has given money to a political party, it would allow the corporate or the company to easily bribe the government of the day. Now, the third and the last main critique which has been given by the author is that electoral bonds stifle voters' right to know, wherein voters like you and me will have no idea as to how a political party has received its funding. And therefore, to continue to have free and fair elections in India, voters are required to know and have the complete access to information of political funding so that voters can make an informed decision as to for which political party they're going to vote for. And apart from this, according to the author, electoral bonds also violate the essential condition of political equality. Since voters do not know the identity of those corporates, companies, or individuals who are funding political parties, this system of electoral bond scheme prioritizes the donor above the voter, wherein the electoral bond scheme prioritizes the right to privacy of the donor over the right of information of the voter. And this is one of the main critique of the electoral bond scheme. So now hopefully you've also understood as to the main critique which is given by the author with regards to the electoral bond scheme. Now main question for your practice is what are the salient features of the electoral bond scheme? Highlight the various concerns that the scheme has raised for electoral transparency and accountability, wherein both the sections that have been explained would allow you to answer this question. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 9. Now the news in itself is not required to be understood for your UPSC examination. But what is required to be understood from this article are the various features of the Brihadeeswarar temple which is located in Thanjavur, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And what we'll do is try to understand the various features of this temple from the perspective of your upcoming prelims examination of 2019. Now this temple is located in Thanjavur in Tamil Nadu, and this temple is dedicated to Lord Shiva. Apart from this, what you should also know was that this temple was built by the Chola king known as Raja Raja I. And one of the inscriptions which is located in the Brihadeeswarar temple also describes the temple as Dakshina Meru. Now Meru in Hinduism is considered to be a mountain which stands in the center of the universe. And it is within that context that the Brihadeeswarar temple is called Meru of the South. And this temple is located within the enclosure of the Sivaganga fort. Now one aspect that you should understand is that the Sivaganga fort was constructed later by the Nayaks of Tanjore in the 16th century. However, the Brihadeeswarar temple, which is located within the Sivaganga fort, was constructed by the Chola king Raja Raja I. Now this Brihadeeswarar temple is part of the Great Living Chola temples. Now there are three temples which are considered part of the Great Living Chola temples which has been given the UNESCO World Heritage Site. wherein among the three temples which are part of the Great Living Chola Temple, Brihadeeswarar Temple is the first one. Other Brihadeeswarar Temple, which is located in Gangai Konda Choli Sivaram, and the third Great Living Chola Temple, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is the Aira Velaswara Temple, which is located in Darasuram. Now I do apologize for any mistake that may have occurred in the pronunciation of these words. Now these are the main facts that are required to be understood about the Brihadeeswara Temple and the Great Living Chola Temples with regards to your upcoming prelims examination of 2019. Now there are two questions for your practice, and what you need to do is pause this video, solve this question, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now the correct answer to the first question is B, 2 only, wherein the Brihadeeswara Temple, which is located in Thanjavur, and also the Brihadeeswara Temple, which is located in Gangai Konda Choliswaram, was built by Raja Raja I. And apart from this, all of the three temples which have been explained are part of the Great Living Chola Temples, and therefore all three are considered as living temples. And with regards to the second question, you already know that the correct answer is C. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 1. Now what this article talks about is that the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, the Khaplang faction, has asked the centre government to revive the ceasefire. Now you have to understand that this news is currently in transition, wherein we'll have to wait and see on how the Government of India responds to the request of the ceasefire. Now what we'll try to understand from this article is the background of the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, of both the Khaplang faction and the Isaac Muab faction. Now one of the early political groups in Nagaland was the Naga National Council, with whom the Government of India had signed the Shillong Accord. However, the signing of the Shillong Accord with the central government, it led to the breaking up of the Naga National Council. And the main faction that was formed was called the National Socialist Council of Nagaland. Now this National Socialist Council of Nagaland became the main insurgency group in Nagaland in the 1990s. And the formation of this group was led by three people. Now these three individuals led to the formation of the National Socialist Council of Nagaland in 1980. However, in 1988, the National Socialist Council of Nagaland also again broke up. And the National Socialist Council of Nagaland split into two factions in 1988, when the first of the two groups which were formed was the NSCN IM, and the second group that was formed was the NSCN K. And these two groups became the main two groups which led either the Naga insurgency or the Naga peace process. So now hopefully up till here you understood as to how the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, the Khaplang division, was formed. Now what had happened in the recent past was that the Government of India and the NSCN IM faction had signed a ceasefire agreement with the Government of India in 1997. And it was with the National Socialist Council of Nagaland IM faction that the Government of India had signed a peace accord in 2015. Now if you take into consideration the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, the Khaplang division, they had also signed a ceasefire agreement with the Government of India in 2001. However, the Khaplang division withdrew from the ceasefire agreement in 2015. Now what had happened in 2017 is that SS Khaplang had died and there was a change in leadership, wherein the new leaders of the Khaplang division of the National Socialist Council of Nagaland want to revive the ceasefire agreement with the Government of India. So now hopefully up till here you've understood that the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, the IM division, had agreed to a ceasefire agreement with the Government of India in 1997. And after that, both the Government of India and the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, the IM division, had also signed a peace accord in 2015. But on the other side, the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, the Khaplang division, which had signed a ceasefire agreement in 2001, withdrew from this agreement in 2015. But however, after the death of its leader SS Khaplang in 2017, there was a change in leadership, and the new leadership of the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, the Khaplang division, want to revive the ceasefire agreement with the Government of India. However, you need to understand one difference is that the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, the IM division, is considered as a political organization, while the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, the Khaplang division, is considered as a terrorist organization in India. And it is within that context that the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, the Khaplang division, wants to sign a ceasefire agreement with the Government of India. But however, we'll have to wait and see on how the Government of India responds to this demand. But hopefully you've understood the background of the National Socialist Council of Nagaland and I've also understood the current context of NSCN IM and the NSCN Khaplang division. Now, based on this explanation, what I'll do is provide you a question for your mains practice. And we'll take this question from the test series that we had prepared for the general studies within the section Internal Security. Now, the question that was asked was elaborate the issues that have hampered an effective conclusion of successive peace agreement with insurgent groups in Nagaland. Now, what I'll do is provide you with a recommended structure for answer and also the facts and concepts that are required to be cited within this answer. And hopefully, this would help you in self evaluation for your mains examination. And so, now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now, we've taken this editorial from page 6. Now, what this article talks about is the de-notified tribes and their concerns with regards to the Habitual Offenders Act. So, what we'll do is try to understand this article in 3 aspects. First, we'll understand the background of de-notified tribes and the Habitual Offenders Act. After that, we'll understand the current problems that the de-notified tribes are facing. And lastly, we'll try to understand the solutions that have been given by the author with regards to solving these problems. Now, with regards to your UPSC syllabus, this article in the upcoming explanation would first be placed in GS Paper 1 within the subsection Social Empowerment, and it would also be placed in GS Paper 2 within the section Social Justice, and within the subsection Mechanism, Laws, Institution and Bodies constituted for the protection and betterment of vulnerable sections, wherein the vulnerable sections that we're talking about are de-notified tribes. So now with this, let us first understand the background of de-notified tribes. Now what had happened during the British rule was that they gave out a Criminal Tribes Act of 1871, wherein under this Criminal Tribes Act, the British government notified around 200 tribes in India as being hereditary criminals, wherein this meant that any individual which was born in any of these 200 tribes were considered to be criminals, irrespective of the fact if they had committed any criminal act or not. And now this Criminal Tribes Act allowed the British government to suppress and harass these 200 tribes, wherein those tribes which were allies of the British government were not under the purview of the Criminal Tribes Act, and those tribes which had rebelled against the British government were included in the Criminal Tribes Act. And this Criminal Tribes Act allowed for close supervision and control of the rebellious tribes and gave sweeping powers to officers of the British government to oppress the tribal communities in India. However, what happened after independence was that the new government of India removed those 200 tribes from the Criminal Tribes Act. And this is how the term de-notified tribes was born, wherein the new government of India de-notified those tribes from the Criminal Tribal Act. And after that, the Criminal Tribes Act was also repealed, and a new Habitual Offenders Act was enacted. But what is happening now is that this Habitual Offenders Act continues to be implemented in around 10 states in India, where even though the Habitual Offenders Act does not contain any name of any tribe, it still allows the various provisions which were given under the Criminal Tribes Act to continue to oppress the tribal communities. And therefore, according to the author, state governments continue to use this law to oppress the tribal communities. So now hopefully up till here you understood the background of the de-notified tribes. Now let us understand the problems that the de-notified tribes are having as according to the author. Now the first problem highlighted by the author is that the Habitual Offenders Act continued as an extension of the Criminal Tribes Act, wherein the Habitual Offenders Act continued with the same repressive measures to oppress the tribal communities. The second problem highlighted by the author is that the mindset of the government and of society is still a reflection of colonial mentality, wherein the government and the society at large continues to view de-notified tribes as being criminals, and because of this they continue to face discrimination by society, wherein in terms of discrimination are not able to undertake any development scheme which has been launched by the government. And apart from this, a main problem which is highlighted by the author is that there is a random grouping of tribes as being scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and OBCs, and this leads to most members of de-notified tribes not being able to form a collective group and ensure that the discrimination that was caused by the British government and the continued colonial mentality is removed. Now, with regards to this problem, the first solution given by the author is that a national commission for de-notified nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes was constituted in 2003, and this commission was again reconstituted under Balakrishnan Renke in 2008. and this commission had recommended for repealing the various provisions of the Habitual Offenders Act so as to end the stigmatization of the denotified tribes. Apart from this, according to the author, the Habitual Offenders Act should be repealed and there should be appropriate legal measures that should be brought in by the state and the central government to improve the conditions of the denotified tribes. So now hopefully you've understood the problems and the solutions given by the author with regards to denotified tribes. Now a question for your practice is consider the following statements on denotified tribes. And what you need to do is pause this video, solve this question and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now the correct answer to this question is P, 2 only, wherein the 5th schedule of the Constitution of India contains provision as to the administration and control of scheduled tribes and scheduled areas, and it does not contain provisions with regards to denotified tribes. And so therefore the first statement is incorrect. However, the denotified tribe does imply those tribal groups that had rebelled or opposed the British India government, and therefore statement 2 is correct. And so the correct answer is P, 2 only. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we've taken this article from page 12. Now what this article talks about is that the former Chief Economic Advisor of India has called that there should be an asset quality review for non-banking finance companies. Now what you need to understand first from this article is what is an asset quality review. Now what had happened was that the RBI undertook a special inspection in 2015-16. And this special inspection was known as the asset quality review, wherein what the RBI did was inspect the accounts of large borrowers and check whether they were properly classified by the banks. And what the RBI wanted to do was to make sure that banks were classifying loans which were non-performing as being non-performing assets. And apart from this, the RBI also wanted to ensure that the banks were not evergreening loans. Now what was happening in 2015-16 was that various large corporations and companies had undertaken loans, but they were not able to pay back the interest or the principal amount on those loans. And therefore what the banks did was to give them more loans so that they were able to pay back the interest or the principal amount of the earlier loan that the company or a corporation had undertaken. And this was known as evergreening of loans, whereby a company or a corporation which continued to postpone the payment of its principal amount continue to undertake loans from different banks so as to pay back the interest of its earlier loan. And the reason the banks were doing this so that they did not have to classify these loans as being non-performing assets. Now one of the main impact of asset quality review that was undertaken by the Reserve Bank of India was that it forced banks to recognize loans as being non-performing assets. So now hopefully up till here you understood that the Reserve Bank of India conducted a special inspection in 2015 and 16, and this special inspection was known as Asset Quality Review, wherein what the Reserve Bank of India inspected was to check the classification of loans that were undertaken by banks of large borrowers. And this inspection was undertaken so as to ensure that banks were classifying loans as non-performing assets and also to avoid the evergreening of loans, which was a common practice that was undertaken by banks. Wherein what banks would do is that if any company or corporation which has not been able to pay back the interest or the principal amount on a particular loan, the bank would further give them a loan so as to pay back the interest or the principal amount. And the reasons the banks were doing this so that they did not have to show this loan as being a non-performing asset. And this process was known as the evergreening of loans. However, because of this special inspection known as the Asset Quality Review that was undertaken by the Reserve Bank of India, it forced banks to recognize loans as being non-performing assets. And it is within that context that the former Chief Economic Advisor of India has said that there should be an asset quality review of non-banking finance companies. Wherein, as you already might be aware of the ILFS issue, wherein this particular non-banking finance company was able to hide roughly around 95,000 crore of debt. And it is within that context that the former Chief Economic Advisor wants an asset quality review of non-banking finance companies so as to ensure that NBFCs are also forced to recognize loans as being non-performing assets. But you have to understand that this news is currently in transition, wherein we'll have to wait and see as to whether an asset quality review of non-banking finance companies is undertaken or not. Now, question for your practice is consider the following statements on asset quality review. And as you already understand, what you need to do is pause this video, solve this question, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now, the correct answer to this question is C, 1 and 3, wherein the asset quality review was undertaken for public sector banks and for private sector banks. And so now with this, let us move on to the next section. Now, one of the common problems that we find from students in the comment section is how to search for a particular topic in DNS videos. Now, what you need to do is type the username browse IAS and then type the topic that you're searching for in double semicolons. And therefore, when you search this way, the topic that you're looking for in DNS videos should become visible on the screen, wherein the Sabrimala judgment was covered in the DNS videos of 29th of September, apart from being covered in the DNS video of 28th of August and also in the DNS video of 27th of July. And therefore, this is one way through which you can search for various topics which have been covered in previous DNS videos. However, you have to understand that if a particular topic does not become visible while searching through this method, what you need to do is change the search word. And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.